I don't know. I'm curious to revisit when you came up with like immortalizing the whole world itself, because I always tell people one of the reasons legitimately one of the reasons I did Bonfire is because of that time. Like I thought it was it is one of the most formative experiences is to watch a world form, like the creative process of that, and like that whole Tolkien quote of the myths that we create, about the myths that we create. And I'd never seen that happen. I actually literally got to watch it happen, or like be around for it, and a little part of it. And it just, like, I don't know, it was formative for me. There's something about it that I've always wondered about, and I've always wondered. I know it kind of just like happens, and you almost like follow the thread yourself. Like you just sort of unwind it as time goes. Like you haven't really. I don't know. I want to talk about that. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, let's start there and then see where the heck this goes. I mean, there's so many things I want to talk about, but I don't know if it's a podcast for now, because I think they're more like topics that I really want to get into, and that's why I need to just continue to do this. But those are more the whole, the whole new agey and psychedelics and all that kind of stuff.
About that.
Okay, so
Caleb and I have been reading a book, Strange Rites and New Religions for God This World by Tara Isabella Burton. Very good book. We actually didn't finish it yet because it came to the library, so we had to return it. So now we're probably gonna have to wait and check it out again, or just buy it. Most likely buy it. But, yeah. So I should say I have some half-finished thoughts about it because I haven't finished the book yet. So
I mean, I'd be curious to hear. Yeah, I think there's a genuine creation and artistic creation, and then there's like drugged artistic creation, and there's the whole world of psychedelics and people who take them in order to be inspired. And that's that's another thing. Again, I don't know if I want to talk about that as much because that's like an interesting sort of side tangent. But what I really do want to talk about is, let's maybe start with the creation process of the world of Immortalis, or of the world of Mundus, and then like how that started. I genuinely want to know, like, how did that originally start in you? Like what's, I mean, I know you were just bored trying to go through med school, but why did that, or EMT school, but like why write in the first place? And then also like, yeah, I mean, I kind of hear, I know some of the story, but I'm kind of curious, like maybe let's start there.
Yeah. In terms of the why write, I don't know. I actually was going through my old like really old Google Docs, which I used in high school too, and I found some old writing projects of mine, and I kind of remembered I've tried to start writing at several points throughout life. I did creative writing, like a creative writing competition in high school, and that didn't go super well.
I actually remember that. What did you write on?
I couldn't even tell you. I'd have to reread it, but
I remember you did that. It was something like at Hathaway Brown or some.
Yeah, some like stuck up school. That's all I really remember. I think I was the only person from Benedict in there, which, I mean, yeah, I didn't really feel like I belonged. I mean, in terms of the writing, I think I just wanted to write. I've liked writing. I've liked reading. I really enjoyed writing going through my undergrad at WCC, and I think I was tired of writing academically because they just made us write so many papers there. But then I came out of WCC, started going through EMT school, and started taking prereqs for med school, and got really tired of the science stuff. So it was like really, I mean, in my mind, I think it was like the most natural route to go was go write something creative, go write like a story about something. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I started to do.
Do you think that med school, and I've thought a lot about this as I get into computer programming, and something that my Anthony, my brother-in-law, said to me was that like coding or computer programming is sort of the most distilled version of the scientific process. Which is an interesting thought. This was just in his, like, it was like, it's something in passing that he said to me, and I just can't stop.
Engineer, so
he's an engineer. Yeah. So something that I like can't stop thinking about though, because it's an interesting thought. But there's also something like wildly creative about it. Like you're coming up with something. Yeah. And there is also something wildly creative about engineering and about science in some sense. But like, I mean, I've always thought of them as almost pitted against one another. Like the creative process and the artistic expression and science and the hard sciences being like diametrically opposed to one another. Yeah. And I'm not so sure about that, because there's even a comment in about Archimedes, or not Archimedes, but on Euclid's Elements, where it says like Euclid, looked upon beauty bare. Some review, I think, I don't know if it was from the New York Times, some review on Euclid's geometry,
and plastered on the back, like
yeah, and it was like he alone has looked upon beauty bare. So there's like, there's something there. There is something true about that. There's something like wildly creative about Euclid's Elements, and there's something wildly creative about like coding and about science. But I don't know. What are your thoughts? Like, is it diametrically opposed, or can they go hand in hand? And also, like, why then did you feel the need to have that creative outlet if you were going to med school? Like, what drove you to be like, look, I need I need to have a creative outlet here?
I don't know if it was necessarily because of the I wasn't doing math, like especially because I started writing when I was going through my EMT program, right? And most of you got your EMT too, like most of what we did there was
kind of boring, actually.
It was like rote memorization.
Yeah.
It's like, go memorize like this list of traumatic injuries and these organ systems, and then rattle them off to me, while I pretend to have a shattered femur and whatever. Anyways, I think it was more about that aspect than it was about the sciences, because I really do love the sciences, and there's I guess I'm still just doing rote memorization with most of it, but I do enjoy that. I think it was more about the fact that what I was expressly trying to do was just hammer something into my brain. And so I really wanted a way to then like put something out, I guess. So yeah. But to answer your original question, like, I don't think they're diametrically opposed at all. I think it's some poet, maybe Milton, or maybe we were just talking about this in relation to Milton. The idea that, poets flourish because of the bounds on them, like because of the restrictions of, the rhyme or the meter, or the fact that, this type of poem is exactly this long, and you have to fulfill these constraints. Like, they thrive because of that. I think science, and maybe more specifically, like the scientific method, provides a framework to understand the world. And this is something I've kind of gotten more into as I've developed more of the world. But the world of Mundus is just that I need a framework to understand even my creative world. And a large part of that is almost like creating this, I don't exactly know what to call it, but like creating a framework for the world. Like, what are the laws, what are the rules and restrictions for my world that I'm creating? And once I have those, it actually makes it easier for me to be creative. Like, once I know the limits, I can actually start to flourish. So I think you see that in the sciences as well. Like, I think once you start to really understand the limits of your field, or the limits of what you're working on, you can actually start to flourish, and you can see like some incredible growth in different scientific fields. We're not really talking about anything specific, so I'm struggling to think of specific examples. We're really talking in generalities here, but
So what about, okay, what inspired the limits of your world? So like what inspired both the limits of your world, and what did you use as reference points for the framework of your world, and how did you sort of, I suppose, discover the frameworks of your world?
Yeah.
And I know you've thought about this, so I'm
Yeah.
This is something that's, it's interesting.
At first it was necessity. And we haven't really talked about this. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but in this conversation we haven't really talked about this. You know, the way that I started writing the world was really haphazard. Like I just randomly started writing one day, didn't have a long-term plan at all, didn't even recognize that I was writing a book. And even by the time that I had finished writing book one, I still hadn't even really thought out the world too much. Like, I think a lot of people start, just from what I've seen with other writers, you know, I've been a part of a couple writers groups now, and what I've seen with a lot of them is that they start the process with the world building, they start the process with like the setting of those limits, and then they start to write. I started the process by like just writing random stuff.
Yeah.
And coming up with characters just on the fly, boom, and they'd be leaving this place, so they need to go to a new place. So crap, got to come up with a new place, and I don't know. Let's just make it. Let's put the city on a lake. I don't know. Like, that sounds kind of cool. And then but then in book two, now we're going back to that city, and I have to think like, shoot, how would that actually work? Why'd they end up on a lake? Like, what's this doesn't make any sense. Yeah. But I've already written like 400,000 words, so I kind of have to justify it at this point. 'Cause I want to go rewrite the whole story. And so then I'm kind of having to backtrack and lay the rules, which I probably should have laid in the first place. But
I don't know about that though, because there's something almost like if you build the world first, there's always the tendency maybe to be over restrictive or under restrictive, right? And finding the balance between having limits set upon yourself and upon the world, and then but also like having the freedom to just, because I think sometimes like you are, and this is why again, like why are the sciences good for creativity or bad for creativity? Because like there's something that I think a lot of people think of as like, if I have no limits, I can be wildly creative, I can go in any direction I want to, my imagination can run wild, right?
Yeah.
Which, like, fair enough, for sure. There's something to that, I suppose. But at the same time, it's like, but then if you really want to take that thing that you just like wildly just like threw upon a wall and make it into something actually beautiful, then you have to start to actually take the colors and the patterns that you just like pooped onto a wall, and
you gotta add a little definition.
Yeah, you gotta add like definition to them and be like, what is this actually? What is this thing? Which is, I think, partly where. I think it's partly where like modern art gets off, right? Because there's a tendency to just literally take colors and splatter them onto a canvas and then be like, this expresses this, or and people have all these ideas of like, well, if I'm doing something, like if I'm doing something expressive, then the painting expresses the thing that I'm doing, and all these elements, and I'm just a bunch of weird, stupid things that people are like, well, it means this thing, and if you only knew the process, but it's like, yeah, but the thing itself, the end product, has never been defined. There's no definition to it. There's nothing that I can actually grasp onto, I can look at, I can recognize, I can actually have any sort of connection to as a human being. It just looks like someone shit on a canvas. It's like, sometimes they did just shit on a canvas and I call it art. So it's like but at the same time, it's like there is part of that is artistic, where it's like there's just this wild expression.
Yeah. But
then also the definition. So I'm not sure like if having created the rules and the formation of the world first necessarily make the end thing, or if, like you said, almost discovering it as you go, because there is some, and this is another thing I'd ask, is like what, like the part of like self-discovery, like what part of like discovering the world along with your characters and along with actually, like as you write, you discover right? Which
Yeah.
was really interesting to watch. I'll be honest. That was one of the most interesting things to watch. Which was like, you know, I remember like the first chapters that you sent me were one thing, and they are wildly different than what
they are now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're still the same characters, still like the same settings and things like that. But like the interior, the details of the story changed drastically as time went on, and I think changed for the better, most definitely. But it was interesting to watch that almost like self-discovery, like you were discovering the world. That's why I said I loved opening it up at night and like reading as you were writing. Like I'd be like reading the part that you were writing. I'd be like, dude, you got to write more. Like,
I honestly, I mean, I told you this to you yesterday, but I feel like you're the only one who enjoyed watching that process. I don't know if it's because we like think similarly, but like Caitlin is, she hated watching that process. She was always super annoyed. You know, I'd give her something to read, and then 4 days later, I'd give her like the same chapter to read, and she'd be like, "Paul, it's been like 4 days. Like you can't just change everything." And I was like, "But, babe, it's the creative process." I didn't like this character's name. I didn't like what he did, so I killed him. Like I don't know. And now I've got to change the whole book. I don't think I've actually done that yet.
No,
but
you haven't. Thank goodness. That would be.
I don't know. I think something I was thinking about was that there are kind of like two, and this is just more as I write more. I think there's two sort of principles maybe that I need to hold in tension, in the sense that, on the one hand, I just want to be creative. Like I want to explore this world with my characters. At the same time, or I guess on the other hand, I also need to be the architect of this world, and I need to provide some amount of cohesiveness to the world, right? So it's like, it's great to just travel with a character and to a new place to find, you know, a city built on a lake and be like, whoa, that's crazy, that's awesome. But behind the scenes, then I also have to think of, you know, how is this going to fit in with the rest of the world? Does I mean, this is something that actually I don't think it actually ever really comes through in the writing, but it's something.
Put that down.
Yeah, sorry. It's something that
you should just stop playing with the mic.
No, I know. It's just.
I know it gets kind of fun.
Got to take my meds. Is the climates. This is weird, but
interesting.
Yeah, it's the climates of the different cities and how that would form the people. It's not something I thought of at first. It's not something I thought of probably all throughout book one. But as soon as book two starts, this is not really spoilerish, but in book two, just geographically, you see some of the South.
Yeah.
And most of book one stayed in essentially two climates, right? You had like this general, normal, medieval England climate kind of thing. And then you had like a more equatorial climate. That was it. And I never thought really anything of it other than, okay, these people are probably going to fish a little more down in the equator. Like, honestly, I never really thought about it. Once book two hit, I realized, hey, not only do I, like, should I actually be thinking about how the climate and how, like, the actual geography of the world would affect these different cities and peoples, but it might actually help me in my discovery of the world, right? Like, it might help me to understand what it might help me to create a, for example, like rainforest tribe, you know? It might help me in creating them to know what a rainforest is like. Like, literally what the ecosystem of a rainforest is like. What kind of food do they have access to?
Interesting.
Right? What kind of lives are they going to be living on a day-to-day basis? What kind of threats are they going to be dealing with? All right, now this is a pretty developed civilization, so how would they have gotten there, right? Cool, that's awesome. What are they going to look like now, you know, like 1,000 years after this civilization has like started, like planted roots and grown, and they've been uprooted a couple times, come back, started to like live in like near harmony with the rainforest. What are they going to look like now? But it's those like, so I guess what I'm trying to say is finding the creativity process, I guess, would bring me to the point where, you know, my character comes to a rainforest and finds people in the rainforest and finds this town, or maybe this town on the edge of the rainforest. I'll use an actual example from the book. They go to this town on the edge of a rainforest, right? They interact with these people there. It's a really cool interaction in the book. You know, they get to see this new culture. And that's something I wrote just like off the cuff, just flying by the seat of my pants kind of thing. Yeah. Because I was like, this is really awesome. Later, I went back, edited, this is the first chapter of book 2, edited that chapter and did like a full day and a half, 2 days of research into actual Amazonian tribes. Yeah. And then tried to figure out, sort of extrapolate from that and say, okay, well, what I set up was not a tribe literally living in the rainforest, but a tribe on the edge of the rainforest. Okay, what would that look like? Kind of extrapolate from that, and then sort of add in some of my own touches. Yeah. And start to fill out the vision. Yeah. And how much of that actually makes it into the book, I don't really know. Yeah. A lot of it is just for me. I don't think I edited the chapter even that much. I think the most I added was like a comment about a liquor they were drinking. Yeah. But for me, for my sake, I was like, I filled this all out. It makes sense to me now. You know, I'm not going to go in and write like a dissertation on Amazonian tribes in the rainforest. But for my sake, I need that structure. Yeah. Because otherwise the world doesn't make sense to me. And I kind of just fall apart writing, or at least editing. Yeah. That was really long-winded. I'm sorry. I think I got away
that's
from
kind
the
of
original.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, off of that, I guess I think the natural question is how much this world plays a part in the creative work, right? And you have different. So, I mean, again, we've talked about this. I mean, of course. You know, hopefully the people listening to this podcast actually listen, you know, like Tolkien. You know, it's hard to find people who don't like Tolkien. Yeah. It's quintessential sort of. But then you have people like Sanderson. You have all these different fantasy writers. You know, we both have liked Paolini. But you have like everybody's created these different worlds, and all of them have elements of this world. Like you can't get away from having elements of this world, but like how much does this world and how much do the laws and the formation of this world play into the creation of another world, and how much of it is also like the dreaming up of if things might be ideal, or if certain curtains might be removed, or if certain veils might be lifted in this world to see other dimensions of being, right? Yeah. So like if we were to look upon other dimensions of being in this world that do exist, you know, like what would that actually be like if we were in more, if we could see the fourth dimension. Like, yeah, or like, you know, and this gets into the whole thing. I was listening to, it bothers me so much, but like, you know, people were talking about how, oh my gosh, if only, I think it was actually Joe Rogan was talking about how, he's talking like one of the Weinsteins, and how they were saying how scientists are now believing that there's other dimensions of being, and that like
quantum mechanics, all that.
Yeah, all this kind of stuff, right? And it's like, yeah, I mean, this is something that has been known since like thousands. I mean, every ancient people, everybody has always known that there's like if
Plato's world of forms, Heidegger talked about like I forget what he called it, like the place beyond the veil or something.
You're just using you're using like a different, I suppose, scientific term for what we've already known, which is like there are, and this gets into the whole New Agey stuff, which is like the whole, you know, people are always like searching for this, you know, to lift the veil into the spiritual realm or to other dimensions of being, right? And it's like, yeah, there are other dimensions of being. We already know this. Like, let's maybe start there and let's talk about what we already know. But it was interesting to listen. This is again a side note, but and we'll go back to the original question. But it was interesting to listen to them talk, because it was like, and Joe Rogan was like, man, if people only knew that there were other dimensions of being, like other beings who were communicating with us
Yeah.
from these dimensions,
Yeah.
people would stop worrying about all this,
I think
bullshit.
we shot some of their balloons down recently.
Yeah. We shot their balloons. Yeah. It's like,
Still don't know what those are.
yeah, those are definitely not other dimensions. Like we would just stop worrying about all of this silly stuff. And it's like, well, actually, that's not true. Funny enough, human beings have this weird thing where we continue to worry about the things, even though we absolutely know that there are other spirits and other beings that are interacting with us. In fact, oftentimes we still continue on our ways, which is one of the mysteries of humanity. But that's another side note. But anyways, I want to go back to the question of like how much does the lifting of the veil, like when you're almost, how much of this world plays into the world that you've created, and how much of it is like trying to lift the veil into other worlds, or to sort of, like the interaction between all of these things, and the, again, kind of this whole idea of how do you create a world, how do you create a different world. But like, I don't know, I mean, again, like how much of this was just sort of flying by the seat of your pants, how much of this was, okay, I fly by the seat of my pants, I discover it, and then I dig into it later on.
Yeah. I mean, for book one, and honestly, a lot of the world building initially, it was just, it was just, making it up as I went. To be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Like
But I remember very early on, you took the idea for the, again, I'm not going to really give away much here, but like you took the idea for like the magic and the otherworldly forces from the three like principles of physics, the three laws of physics.
The four preternatural relationships.
Oh, there you go. That's what it is. Yeah.
Four. Yeah, four.
Four. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was something that I had. Yeah, actually, I guess you're right about that. There were things that I had in mind and was thinking about and had thought about for a while. I did my junior author project on Kurt Vonnegut, and so I had a lot of like his themes in mind throughout that time.
What are his themes? Just to give a little bit of context. Give me a couple.
This is pulling me back a little bit. In the Sirens of Titan, that was one of the books I largely focused on. One of the things that I took away from that and really harped on, especially in my junior author project, was basically his desire to essentially know more about the human nature. Like this desire to learn and this recognition that he did not know everything. That's something that I continue to come back to reading Vonnegut, is that he was able to recognize that he was on. Let me kind of like back up a little bit. I think there's a lot of people who maybe write thinking that they know everything, like they've got the answers, right? I think Vonnegut, one of the things that sticks out to me and continues to stick out to me, is that he is painfully aware of the fact that he doesn't really know a whole lot about anything. And that's kind of okay.
Socratean.
A little bit Socratean. And that's something that I still love about reading his books. His characters truly are on journeys, and they're wild and wacky, and reading him often does feel like probably a psychedelic trip. Like reading Slaughterhouse-Five, you've got this character, spoiler alerts for people, you've got this character who, fights in World War II, all this stuff, and then, suddenly whisked away to an alien planet, and he's put in this zoo with this super hot naked actress, and, now we're flashing back to his life on Earth, and he's older, and he's married to this kind of, like, old hag, and now we're kind of going back to Montana Wild Hack and the alien planet. Like, it's kind of psychedelic, it's this journey. And then in the Sirens of Titan, you have this character who is just sort of swept along through an almost like Dante's Inferno type deal, just to these different planets. There's a lot of themes of religion in the Sirens of Titan, and Vonnegut himself was a humanist, but at the very end of the Sirens of Titan, this is massive spoilers for the end of it, in case anybody wants to read it. Massive spoilers. The main character dies, and as he's dying, he basically sees the heavens open up. He sees someone coming down from the heavens, and he basically is like, has this vision of heaven, of going to heaven. Vonnegut wasn't really a fan of organized religion at all. He liked Jesus. He liked Jesus in the sense that he liked the Beatitudes, right? He thought that Jesus had some good ideas. He thought organized religion was a sham. It was awful. Did awful things to people. He had his reasons for it. But despite that, he wasn't railing against sort of the underlying ideas behind that. He actually he was open to the idea that, hey, maybe I could be wrong about this. Like maybe there's something more to this, and
I just don't see it.
And I don't see it, and I need to explore like my own nature a little bit more. So that's something that's always stuck out to me. Like with Rubens, the main character, and Immortalis, that's something that I think is fundamental to his character. I was thinking about this. I don't want to spoil anything for book 2 because book 1 isn't even out yet. But one of the things that's central to his character is this idea that he, especially as the story goes on, is that he just continues to push towards an ideal. I mean, spoiling the ideal isn't really spoiling anything. You get this in like book 1, but peace. Like Rubens is this guy who is obsessed with peace, and it's not really a well thought out idea. Like Rubens never explains what this peace is. I don't even think he rightfully knows what this peace is. He just has this vague, airy idea of peace because, he was a child soldier, right? Like since he's been 12 years old, probably even younger, he's just had this idea that peace is something good. I want peace, right? And as he grows throughout the war, and when we first meet him in book 1, he has these little tastes of peace, right? One of the big images for him is sitting on this island in a lake, right? And smoking his pipe and like just listening to the water and like the wind through the grass. And for him, that's like an image of peace. It's not well defined. Anyway, the central tenet to Rubens, or I guess one of the central drives in Rubens's character, is just this idea that he will do what it takes to A, figure out what peace is. And then B, achieve that peace. Like that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes for him,
Yeah.
And to me, that's a little bit, or I guess that kind of was born out of this idea that what Vonnegut was doing in a lot of his books was trying to strip away so many of the extraneous parts of humanity and get to the core of what a human was. What do we as humans desire? What do we know? He's got this great line about in Sirens of Titan. It's kind of satirical. He goes like, outwardness at last had lost all its attractiveness or something, or we had explored outwardness entirely. The only place left for mankind to turn was inside, was himself. Like only the soul remained terra incognita. Anyway, I think that's very central to Vonnegut's philosophy and
that's where we've gotten
mindset.
Yeah, it's where we've almost gotten to as a culture too.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gotten to this place where people we have sort of, I mean, you still have people pushing for more outward exploration. Well, you have a lot of, I think, the younger generations kind of tired of it, like tiring of this outward exploration. And like, well, what about the stuff that's gone inside? Like a lot of the, like the people who have pushed outwards, maybe being their father, their moms, or their dads, or their older siblings, and like they've seen them push outwards, and they have been left behind, or they have felt deep wounds and loneliness. And then a thing that you touched on, I think, is one that I think so many people relate to, which is the desire for peace, or that Rubens, you sort of built into Rubens' character, which is like you have this fuzzy idea of peace, and I think we all sort of have that. We have these like moments that stick out to us of like times that we had genuine peace
and like happiness,
and sometimes they're just like they're like literally fleeting moments in a single day when we were 12 years old or 10 years old or 8 years old or 5 years old, and
you probably can't even remember like the circumstances surrounding it.
No,
you probably just remember that that was a great day. That was a great moment.
Yeah.
And you like, maybe when you think about it, you wish you could like distill like, okay, how to get there? How do I get there again? Like,
Yes.
let's get that going forever. Like, let's make that happen.
Yeah. And as the older you get, the fuzzier sometimes those moments and those memories become, and the harder it is to even remember, like you said, the circumstances around them. And yet, like you said, like there's this desire of, but I want that. Like that's the thing that I desire. I deeply desire that thing, right? That place. And maybe there's some people who have gone off and said, I don't want that at all. I don't know. But I think there's a deep desire in the human heart to like try to find a way back to those, or the place that those moments define, right? Like those moments almost define and create, or are calling forth a certain place or defining a certain place. And we want to get to that place. And what is that place? And how do we get there? And we all have the experience of growing up and getting, becoming functioning adults in society.
Jaded, grizzled old men at the ripe age of 24.
Yeah.
The things I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's ridiculous. The things I've seen, the things I've done, I can't, yeah, it's ridiculous. No, but it's...
No, I know what you're saying.
But there's like a certain, like, you begin to realize, like, I've got to speed up. Like, and sometimes rightfully, I think about this often about, becoming a father and a husband and a father, which is like, there is a part of putting away some ideals and just, hey, I've got to make the soil of the earth bring forth some sort of fruit, or I'm going to die and I'm not going to be doing my duty to take care of my family. And so there's a certain, like, I've got to put off that dream to go search for that place of peace for a time, and then I'll be able to go back to it. Now, I don't think that's actually true, and I think there's a mystery here, which is like in putting it, quote unquote, putting it off. I don't think we get really, especially for men, and maybe I'll go down this tangent. Fine, whatever, screw it. Right. I'll go down this tangent.
That's fine.
So we'll get back to where we were going eventually.
I feel like I need a notepad to like write down my thoughts on the way.
Yeah, we'll just keep it all there.
Publish them in a document later. Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's a aspect of young men today, and just men in general today, where there's this desire to stay young, exactly what you're talking about, which it's the same thing. These moments of peace, or just a desire to be, and many of them are I think contained within childhood, and many of them are contained within our early years before innocence is ripped violently away from us by this cold world. Which, to be fair, there's a couple things in growing up, and one of the things you have to come to terms with is that, like, this world is at times a very brutal and cruel place, and it's
classic loss of innocence.
Yeah, like like that is one thing that you do have to come to terms with as you get older, but I think people sort of have this experience, and they want to go back to those things of childhood. Good desire. I think that's actually a legitimate desire, and I've said this to you before, and I've tried to say this to other people as well. I don't know how many people have listened to this one, but I think there's a great mystery, and it's something that I wrestled with. Like, I didn't think I was going to struggle getting married and then becoming a father. Like, I didn't think I was going to struggle with this, like, desire to stay young and do things that, quote unquote, young people do. Go off on vacations and trips and travel and have all these crazy beautiful experiences, wonderful experiences. Again,
tour Europe.
Tour Europe. Yeah. No, I mean, like,
sorry.
No, there's like, there are like legitimately good experiences. I'm not like knocking the experience itself.
No,
but I think I think there's more of like this like, if I don't have a family, if I don't become get married and settle down and have a family, I'll be able to do these experiences and do these things that I really want to do. And yet, I think one of the greatest mysteries is, like, when you do have a child, and this is coming from like a man, and this is absolutely a man a man's experience of this. I don't know, fully. I still got to, hash this out with Nicole, like all that women, because women experience something I think totally different and unbelievable. But you end up with this little child, and for me, I have a son, and you watch your son start to grow up, and your childhood suddenly returns. Like the thing that you were searching for, the desire to become a child again, to preserve your childhood, happens if you allow yourself to become present to your child. Now, it won't happen if you continue to go searching for these other things. And it's one of the big things that you end up having to fight in yourself, which is like, I feel like I need to go do this thing because I need to build something. I need to be successful. I need to
make a lasting impact or something.
Make a lasting impact. Yeah. Do things that are legitimately good as a man to be able to do, right? You have this desire to do those things. Beautiful. To build something lasting that you can pass on to your children. Beautiful desire, absolutely necessary. You should pursue that as well, right? But yet, if you do that at the expense of being present to your child, you end up losing that very thing that your heart so desires. And you don't even, and it's not a selfish thing. It becomes a thing of like you giving yourself to your child, you just making yourself present to them and being and entering their world again and like playing with the cars with them and listen and staying in that world with them and having to fight yourself often with this feeling of like, well, I've got this thing that I really want to accomplish today. And if I'm going to be present to my kid, I'm not going to accomplish that. And yet like the call is more of, hey, just be present. And then in being present, you suddenly rediscover you are suddenly a child again. Like you're rediscovering the heart of a child. Yeah. And I think there's a beautiful almost pattern of human life that this takes place, and it gets into, unveiling certain mysteries and spiritual realities and, other dimensions, right? Like of being, right? Where it's like, I'm going to use that word because it's going to be the thing that'll catch on with the world, right? Like if you want to use that language to talk about, if you want to use that language to talk about spiritual realities, fine, I'll use other dimensions of being. Let's talk about other dimensions. I believe
mechanics.
Yeah, fine. If you want to use that language, if that's the language we got to use,
what are those little like the tardigrade little bear things?
Yeah, the truth is
start throwing scientific buzzwords out there.
Yeah. You know what? And you're still going to find at the end of the day that the same truth that the ancient, people knew is the same truth that you're discovering with all of your things anyways, because I don't know.
This is kind of not really tangential, but I was going through some psychology notes the other day, and I guess for context, I'm studying to take the MCAT right now. But anyway, one of the notes in the psychology section was that it was kind of a sarcastic note, not written by me, basically saying that all of modern psychology and sociology is simply rediscovering, expounding on, and providing proof that Aristotle and all those other old stuffy philosophers were right. And I thought that was kind of funny, and that's something I have kind of noticed. I don't, obviously that's a generalization. They were wrong about many things. Aristotle had no idea how light or vision worked. He was very wrong about that. Yeah. But a lot of the things that he talked about in regards of like human nature, what the humans want, like friendship is a great one actually. Like his idea of friendship, like a friendship of utility versus like a true friendship rooted in virtue. Like that's something that we see nowadays being sort of backed by modern like sociology and psychology. Like that's pretty cool. But yeah, it was all back then. Like kind of what you're saying. We're sort of just rediscovering what the ancients already knew, maybe just by intuition, and now we're providing some of this scientific, I guess you can call it, proof that hey, this principle, this idea, this intuition that maybe they had turned out to be right, and that's kind of crazy.
What's somewhat silly about that is like we've just changed the methodology for proof, right? Like we've changed what it means to prove something. So it's
I see, yeah.
like they did prove it just through their methodology of
their
proofs,
methodology
right?
is just a little different, yeah.
Which is different, right?
Okay,
So
yeah.
then we were like, well, we're going to throw out all their methodology and we'll come up with our own methodology. And lo and behold, we've just proved the same thing.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, well, I mean, like, you know, I mean, it speaks to the fact that there is objective truth and objective reality. That gets me all the time.
I mean, I don't know. There are benefits to the way that moderns approach things that maybe Aristotle didn't have. You know, like Aristotle couldn't see inside of somebody's brain and literally see, you know, the different areas of the brain being activated, kind of thing. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, yes, they had a methodology, but I think one of the cool things about modernity and postmodernity is that, you know, we have like it's almost more concrete. It's almost more tangible to us, or it should be more tangible to us. That we can, you know, look at these things and see the objective truth of them and see like objective reality, like through this now more tangible methodology that we have. Yeah.
Because we're looking at brain scans and we're looking at actual...
Yeah,
we're able to like, dig into...
Yeah, we're digging into it. I guess psychology and sociology maybe isn't the best field to talk about there. It's still a little...
I mean, they did. I mean, they've come up with some really innovative ways to test things.
But I don't know. It's... There are... we're still developing. We're adding to the wealth of knowledge. And we're, I guess, making deeper our knowledge base, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, but okay, so if we're making deeper our knowledge base, oh man, this gets into another thing, which is this whole idea now that people have, which is like this. Is that Caitlin? If that's Caitlin.
No, that's okay. It's
oh, it's your alarm.
It's like 7 o'clock for her, 7:30 for her.
Wow.
So I can. Yeah.
Okay.
She is in Alaska right now, for anybody wondering. It's doing some cool stuff with snow.
Yeah, which is actually
employing
really cool.
the scientific method.
Yeah, with snow, which is really fascinating. I've never seen snow grains. Awesome. I never realized they're almost like, I mean, they're crystals. They're like these beautiful ice crystals.
Yeah.
Almost like one of them looked like a diamond. The picture that she sent.
Yeah, they're really cool.
It's like beautiful diamond.
It's really awesome to like the little microscope she has to like watch the snow grains like melt through the microscope. Is a lot of fun. And just to see like the different types of crystals. Like I've been out with her before and, you know, we go through like the snowpack and she's like, this is, you know, depth ore. This is like the fresh snow, and, you know, like put it on the crystal card, like check it through the microscope. It's honestly really
and you can
fascinating.
tell the different the different types, like where the snow.
Well, based on like size, and there's different characteristics. You know, you've got. I'm probably gonna butcher this, but I don't know. Like there's a difference between like rounded grains and facets, if that makes sense. You know, one is maybe...
No, it doesn't make sense.
All right, well,
okay.
Think of like a traditional pretty snowflake versus something that's been sitting on the ground for a while and has melted and like coalesced into some like chunky boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it almost looks like the things that have like melted though almost look like diamonds.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. Yeah.
Like whereas you have this beautiful patterned snowflake that almost turns into like this diamond when it like...
Yeah, eventually it starts to come together with the other snow. Yeah. I don't know. That's a whole tangent. I don't want to...
What does skied on snow look like, huh?
Skied on?
Yeah, like it's got to be a little bit of friction when like someone takes their skis and goes over a snowpack and then...
I'm pretty sure they're just melting the snow, I think.
Yeah,
like the friction is just like they're just...
That's where my brain
They're basically just water skiing down the hill. Yeah. There's no such thing as actual snow skiing. It's all water skiing. I don't think that's actually true.
Powdered water skiing.
Yeah. Gonna get some pushback on that one, I think. But,
yeah.
Sorry, we're getting away from like the whole...
Yeah, we're getting away from the story. So let's try to go back. Let's try to get back to creation of stories and how... I think the original question was how do you implement
the real world?
Yeah, how do you implement, how much of the real world do you implement, and then how much of like the other dimensions of being? How much are the other realities of leaking into your creation of another world? And because it has to be different from this world, but yet, all knowledge comes through the senses. You can't really create anything.
And it's also really hard to write something that is I wouldn't even say really hard. I think it's impossible to write something that we have not experienced. So you have to use language that another human understands, right? It's kind of like, I don't know if you ever, I don't know how universal this experience will be, but like talking to somebody who has been blind from birth, like trying to describe like a color to them or like something that is exclusively in the visual dimension, it's incredibly difficult, if not just straight up impossible, because there's no frame of reference for them. So when you're writing something, like you have to be careful at least for me, I have to be careful not to go too abstract, because as soon as you go too abstract, it doesn't make any sense, right? And you can go more abstract, I think, if you lay the groundwork. So, there's some... I play a little bit with like the mental reality in books. I think a lot of people do this, like scenes taking place in people's minds. And I think the reason that works, yes, it is kind of abstract, but most people have, I want to say all people, hopefully, have some kind of dialogue going on in their head. They kind of can intuit, all right, like I can understand that this person is thinking about this or imagining this, or, if two characters are having a mental dialogue, they can picture probably what that would be like, and then in some way relate to that. Like I can imagine what it would be like to talk mentally with you right now. Yeah. Even though I've never done that before.
Yeah. What's fascinating? I don't remember where I heard this. I know it was from some psychologist, probably on some podcast. Yeah. There's a good chance it was Jordan Peterson. But there's other podcasts I listen to with psychologists, so it may have come from somebody else. And they were talking about like the amount of people who don't have the inner dialogue. And there are people. And that really almost terrified me of like, what in the world would...
Well, do they like think in images or scenes?
No, they were just saying like there's just a very small... I don't know if it's small or if it's larger than... I can't... Again, this is a very long time ago that I remember listening to this. But I remember it kind of blowing me away, which was that, there's a certain segment of the population that has no inner dialogue. They just don't dialogue. Like there is no, and it's like, and it gets me thinking about like, did they just like kill their conscience? I don't know what that, like, what did you do? How do you not have an inner dialogue? Like, how is there no inner...
I actually have no idea how that would... Yeah, I don't know.
I don't even know how that, like I don't know how I would live without...
Probably just talk to myself a lot out loud.
But that's still an inner dialogue. Like, you're just dialoguing with yourself exterior.
Like, I think you're just talking to yourself.
I guess so. I mean, it's strange.
It's weird.
Has nothing to do with what we were just talking about, but it's also whatever. Fine with me.
But I don't know. The bringing things into the world is like the carryover from this world into the created world. I don't think I don't have a formula for it. It's mostly... I mean, everything I write has inspiration from this world. I'm not coming up with anything wildly new. Like I'm literally not creating anything that is new. Yeah. There's the saying, like there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah. But then how much of it are you plucking from, and this is like Tolkien's thing, which is like the stew or the pot of, which is almost like the cauldron of stories and elements of stories that the mythic, the myths and all the stories and fairy tales that have been told up and down the centuries, and and there are certain things that really end up in that cauldron, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of that actually comes in the world building and in the history. So when when I'm building a history, this isn't really like spoiler territory because it's just the history of a nation, but one of the nations in the world, Shind, is a northern nation, and that's cool. Their history, basically, they're a city that was built inside of an inactive volcano, way up in the north, They've over centuries, millennia, like hollowed this volcano out. Like they've got a thriving civilization, and a lot of the stories in universe that are ascribed to Shind, I drew a lot of inspiration from Norwegian stories, Scandinavian stories, Viking stories, like that kind of thing. Just because I thought those cultures had a lot of overlap. That kind of environment worked well for me, and I also love like that culture. Like I thought it was really awesome, and I thought it'd be really fun to try to, take that Norse mythology, and also the actual history of the Vikings, and find a way to almost, I don't want to say just like transplant it, because I definitely did not just like copy and paste it,
Yeah.
That would be way too obvious. But like I used Old Norse, there's a lot of names in the Shindian culture that I drew from Old Norse, I found like an Old Norse dictionary online, and literally like I just was like, I am not a linguist. I'm not going to be able to come up with a language. If I tried, it would be awful. So yeah, I used Old Norse, I used Latin in other places because I know some Latin, like Greek, but with Shind specifically, sticking to the example, I drew from, Norse stories, Viking stories, with different clans, fighting, throughout history. So there's some of that. But then I also integrated, a story that I love, the Odyssey, with their foundation. Like their founder went on an Odyssey to found Shind, So in the Odyssey, obviously, Odysseus doesn't end the story with founding Ithaca, and founding his home and like finding Penelope and like marrying Penelope and settling down, right? Obviously, he's got like a home. It's about returning to home. For the founder of Shind, like Siana, it's about finding essentially a new home. So I drew a lot of inspiration from the Odyssey in terms of this, travel across the ocean, right? And at least in universe, there's this book called the Saga of Siana. It's not really a book, but it's an oral tradition that's passed down and has recently gained a lot of popularity in the capital city of Superbia because there's a lot of Shindian people there who have moved to Superbia after a recent alliance. Not really recent. It's an older alliance, but in the Saga of Siana, they tell this like epic story of like Siana's crazy journey across the north, where she like interacts with these Shindian gods and like battles the weather and the ocean and the lightning, and then like when she gets to the what's now known as like the Parvos Mountains, she single-handedly like carves out the volcano. Like the volcano's about to erupt, and so she calls the whole sea, which she just conquered, like up out of the ocean, which is kind of like crazy. And she like dumps it on the volcano and like makes the volcano go inactive, and then like she uses the sea to then carve out the hollow to hollow out the volcano, and then she like basically like claims it as her own. And she names it Parvos Mountain after this, bear that traveled with her on the entire journey, which like, if you start to think about it and pick it apart in universe, you're like, okay, come on, a bear like sailed with her across the entire north, and then she conquered the ocean. But like some of the inspiration I drew there was literally like it's from these great epic Greek tales, like that's. Yeah. But then I took that and I was like, yeah, I love this idea, this epic journey, and I also love Shind as a culture drawing from this Nordic background. So I'm gonna find a way to marry these. I'm gonna find a way to synthesize these, and what would that look like? And yeah, cool. So Shind sort of was born from that, and there's a lot of other stuff throughout the years, but that's like the foundation of Shind was largely born out of, the Norse gods, and then the Greek epics, specifically the Odyssey. So
that's actually really cool. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yeah,
I like the idea of like the carving out of the mountain.
Yeah,
of course. I mean, that's pretty cool.
It's a badass story.
Yeah, it's a badass story.
Dope-ass founder.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Okay. This is going to be somewhat of a slightly change of topic, but this is burning my mind, and I'm going to have to ask this to pretty much any author that writes fiction books now today,
Yeah.
which is how much do video games, how much do video games inspire the way that you write? So I've noticed both with your writing and then the book that we just published, The Hail Thee God and King. It was one of the first conversations I had with the author, which was I sort of laughingly was like, "Hey, did you play World of Warcraft?"
Yeah,
He's like, "Yeah, I really liked World of Warcraft." I was like, which is cool. Like to me, it's really interesting because you can't get away from that. Like it's part of the fabric of
the world today.
Today. And not only is it the fabric of the world, but I remember you talking about this, and this is maybe where we can go with this, but it's like there are different mediums through which we can tell stories, right? We can write, books. We could tell epic tales, epic poetry, fiction and all the subgenres of fiction, and and now we've talked about like the space odysseys and that becoming a kind of a new form of
epic.
Yeah. And then you have operas, right? You can tell stories through operas, and you can tell stories through plays, and you can tell stories through TV shows and through movies, and also video games. And I think like there's a tendency for a lot of people to, I think, put down the art of telling a story through a movie, a TV show, or a video game, because I think oftentimes, especially, and fair enough, a lot of times people take what is the written thing and they'll try to turn it into the TV show or the movie, and people will watch it and they'll be like, that
it's not as good.
Not as good.
Yeah.
And it's true, it's not as good because the original form, you can only, like, to write a book is a particular form of art, and it can only really be that form of art. And it is the best when it is in its most natural form. And yet, of course, as an example, anybody who knows me knows that I will sing the praises of Christopher Nolan up and down. But I think there is that comment that he's made, which is that he tries to tell stories that can only be told through film, has always stuck with me, which is because all of his movies are like, if they were to be a book, they would be terrible. Like it wouldn't work as books. I mean, Interstellar and even Inception and even Dunkirk, the way that he retells the story of Dunkirk can only be really told through the medium of a movie.
As soon as you try to tell it through a book, like if you tried to make a book adaptation of the movie, it would just be a different thing.
Yes, it would be a completely different thing. You can write a book about Dunkirk, right? About the historical, the historical event of Dunkirk, and you can write an incredible book about that particular historic event. Yet he was able to take that historic event and, through the art of filmmaking, tell a story that can only be told through the art of filmmaking. And I wonder about that with video games. And I was talking to somebody that I went to school with about this, and I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on this, of like both the art of telling a story through a video game, and then also like how much have video games molded your writing, because I think in some ways, I mean, I'm reading yours, and then also the book that we just published, Hail Thee God and King, which is like, there's no doubt in my mind that they have been somewhat formed by video games. How much, I'm not really sure, but they definitely have been, and it's interesting to me.
Yeah. In terms of the storytelling in video games, are you kind of wondering, like, how is it different in video games than
how
like
does it inspire? Or like, what about the story? Like, I pick up on it. I don't even know what I'm picking up on, which is video game-esque. And I don't even know. Maybe you don't know. I don't know. I'm really curious about this.
With your first question though, like, is it what is unique about video games as a medium? Or
maybe what is unique about a video and like, what stories are you able to tell in video games that you aren't able to tell through any other medium, right? And or you can tell the same story, but it's not going to be the same thing, right? Like there's a it is its own medium of art, and what is unique about that medium of art compared to others.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know if I can answer that for other forms of art, but
I mean, something that video games do, I think that no other art form does in the way that video games do it, is it puts the player, I mean, it puts the person interacting with the art in a central role. Even if you're playing a game like, let's say, I don't know, Assassin's Creed, right? Where you're playing a character. Well, I don't know. They've got the newer RPG trilogy, but go back to like the earlier games, Assassin's Creed 1, Assassin's Creed 2, like you're playing as a character, Altair. And in Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood and Revelations, you're playing as a character, Ezio, right? So it's a set character. They've got a history, they've got a backstory, all that stuff. They're the main character, all that jazz. But when you're playing through the video game, right, you're controlling Ezio, right? You're almost
controlling literally what he wears.
Yeah, you're controlling what he wears, what he does. Often, you know, which missions he completes first, like how many side quests he completes each game. In Revelations, how many tower defense mini games do you do? The answer is not many, because I didn't find them very fun. But I don't know. Sorry, they're actually whatever. They tried something new. I think it gives you this agency. That's probably the most generic answer that anybody will give you, but it gives the interactee some agency in the art that you often don't have. Like when you go to an art gallery, right? The artist isn't there like holding your hand, you know, holding your hand and like guiding you to paint the painting, right? Or when you go to like read a book, the author isn't like, you know, whispering the words in your ear and you're like typing it out, you know, as you go. But I think in a video game, there's a little bit more of this feeling of I'm almost helping this story unfold. Like I'm helping this world come to life. And I think that's really appealing to a modern audience. Like I think people nowadays, they want agency. They want control. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And video games give them that. And it's an art form that I want to say is unique in that regard. Like, I don't know, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's very many other art forms where the audience is participating in that same way, where you're almost like I mean, this is just speaking from personal experience, but like, I don't know, I've been playing Elden Ring recently, right? And one of the things that's really cool about it is, you know, as I play through it, the world is seemingly like shaped by like what I do, you know, almost.
Yeah.
I guess Elden Ring is maybe not the best example of this, but you know, there's different endings that you can achieve depending on what you do. You know, in one playthrough, I might not go fight these 10 bosses. You know, on the next playthrough, I might choose to fight those bosses and get a different ending. Or I might choose to like complete this side quest, get a different ending. The next playthrough, I might not even interact with the person who starts that side quest. I might not even ever go to that area, right? Like you're experiencing something different, legitimately experiencing something different every time you play through Elden Ring. A better example of this would be like the Mass Effect trilogy, right? You're literally creating a new Shepard every time you play through it, making different decisions.
I remember that game, yeah.
Granted, the endings, I don't know, they kind of, you sort of run into a limitation with how much you can truly influence. But at least when you're playing through, you feel like you have a great deal of control over the world, over the characters. And you do. Like, who lives, who dies. You know, you can get to the end of Mass Effect 3 and it can be, you know, joyful and happy because all of your companions throughout the trilogy, you know, survived and are living, you know, well now, or at least as well as they can. Or you can get to the end and it's like you're like one of the last left, like fighting it. Like, it's sad if you play it that way. Like, that sucks. It's a very different experience.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the agency I'm talking about. Like, I don't think you get that same agency when you're watching a movie. You don't get that same agency when you go to, you know, a museum and look at art. I'm not saying that looking at art or watching a movie or reading a book is worse. it's just different. And I think that's one of the things that differentiates video games from other art forms.
Which is interesting because, like, okay, so there's almost benefits. There's almost, of course, there's pros and cons to both, right? Because there's something about not having your own agency or having less of it, where you're able to go to something and let it have more of an effect upon you, in the sense of, I'll read the Psalms, and it's like sometimes like you read the Psalms and you're like, man, I don't pray the way the psalmist prays. Like, I wish my heart was in this place the psalmist's heart was in. But when you get to that place, you just pray the psalm, just read the psalm through, let it have an effect upon you, and just sit in it, almost like put yourself in the psalmist's shoes, or imagine the psalmist praying that prayer and what it would be like to be able to pray that prayer and have the heart of the psalmist. Yeah. And in that way, the psalm will begin to actually form your heart to, be more conformed to the actual psalms, right? So it's beautiful, almost, and other forms of art have that ability. Whereas with the video game, like, it's somewhat revealing to you yourself. The decisions that you make in a video game can be at times revealing about what's going on interiorly with you. And I mean, I've seen this with good things, bad things. Like, when you're talking about the Assassin's Creed, it's like you also get to choose who you kill. Like, you can
go massacre every single guard in Rome.
Like there's
a monster.
You can be a mass murderer. Just a maniac killer, right? And it's like, or you can literally have like mercy on certain people, right? There's a certain like.
No, I think that. I mean, again, I'll go back to like Mass Effect or Dragon Age, like any of these more classic RPGs. Like, I've tried to play through and do evil playthroughs. People will do these like evil playthroughs where they play through and they, go full like renegade, where they're like, I want to be like, I'm just gonna be like as cold and calculating as humanly possible. Like, I almost want to appear like the villain, right? And I've tried to do that, and I've gotten through like half of Mass Effect 1, and then I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I'm such a dick. I don't know. And maybe part of that is like just socially, I'm like, somebody's watching over my shoulder and probably judging me. But
there's also I don't know about that, because I think there is a certain. You're talking about like we have an agency within the video games, right? Like there's a certain agency that is put into the hands of the person playing it, and if there is some sort of agency, there is some sort of moral agency that. And look, sometimes it's lighter and sometimes it's less light. Okay, so great example of this, right? I think when you were talking about people having an agency, I think of college football, NCAA football 14, the last great football game that has come out. What a great game, right? And what I think about is like the dynasty mode, when you're a coach and you're able to form your own team, or the campus, I can't remember what they called it, where you're getting to play as a player, right? And I found this guy on Instagram, James Bordeaux, I think is his name. It's really fun to like. It's just super small little, where he's literally like playing through as like dynasty mode, or he's playing through as like a player, right? And he's building a whole story off of it on Instagram, where he's like, I was doing this, and he's putting himself in first person. He's like, well, and we entered this great game, and then I struggled in this game and all stuff. And it's really entertaining to watch, because it's how you feel when you play the game. It's like, I'm doing these things, like I'm making these great plays on the field. I'm making these recruiting decisions. I'm going to take a cupcake team. I'm going to take, Florida Atlantic or Appalachian State or like some other like bum school and like turn it into, I mean, Appalachian State's pretty good. Florida Atlantic has had the music. Appalachian State is very good. But but it's literally what like Deion Sanders is doing at Colorado right now, which is like every person that played NCAA football wishes they could do what Deion Sanders is literally doing in real life. Like, that's what we were dreaming of doing when you were playing dynasty mode in college and NCAA football, which was like, take a school that is just bottom of the barrel school. I mean, Matthew went out to a Colorado game and was like, dude, Colorado's like the worst program in the world. They were horrible last year. Like, just a pathetic football team. It's like Deion Sanders is going in there and it's like, I'm going to turn these guys around. And if he does it, He's like living, dude. He's like
a living legend.
He is a living legend if he's able to take a Colorado program.
He did what all of us tried to do with NCAA 14.
Yeah. He suddenly was bringing in blue chip recruits. He's bringing in, he's bringing in these great recruits.
He's playing on easy mode.
Yeah, somehow, yeah. I mean, yeah, he's playing a hard game on easy mode. Yeah, so it's like, but but like that agency, right? So like people having that sort of agency in football and in a game of football, there's not much like moral agency there. In a game that's like there's more violence or there's more, The Witcher, I know there's a lot of like agency in that, like where you can kind of make certain decisions that go certain ways.
That one's actually a great game because it's I don't know. Have you played through The Witcher 3? Oh, okay. Well, it's not as like with Mass Effect. There's like a morality system almost like Paragon Renegade. And so you can almost see like which decision's good, which decision's bad. With The Witcher 3, again, spoiler territory. If you haven't played it and you're going to play it, don't. Do you care if I spoil this?
No, it's fine. Okay. You've kind of spoiled The Witcher for me many times. So
sorry.
I'm not really that. I'm fine.
I feel bad about that now.
I doubt I'm not much of a video game player.
For anybody else, spoilers. But there's this one mission where you, I hope I don't butcher any of the details here. Basically, you're in a swamp. You are interacting with these 3 witches, and at one point you get sent to, this tree spirit, and they want you to like kill this tree spirit or something. And if you kill this tree spirit, I forget the exact series of events, but they'll let like these children go or whatever. They'll let this person go. I think it's children. It's been a while since I played this game. They just remastered it. I should play it again. Anyway, first time I went there, I was like, oh, it's a video game. Because I started talking to the tree spirit. I kind of felt bad for the tree spirit. So, it came down to decision time, and I was like, all right, I can like let this tree spirit go, or I can kill it. And I was thinking in my mind, well, I probably can have my cake and eat it too. Let the tree spirit go, because I think that's the right thing to do. And then I'll probably be able to head back and rescue the hostages, or I think it was the children, and we'll be good to go. So I let the tree spirit go, and I was like, gonna go back to the swamp, gonna go rescue these children, and they're dead. And they're like, that was like the first part in that game where I was like, oh, that kind of cuts deep. But it wasn't like a morally
interesting
black and white situation, know? And I mean, I think The Witcher 3 does that incredibly well. Dragon Age, I think, does that really well too. Mass Effect is also pretty good at that. But I don't know, like with the agency thing, yeah, I think you're right. Like as you get into the better games, they more and more mirror real life, where they put you into situations where, yeah, like you kind of do figure out what you would do, or like you get to see a little bit of yourself. They're almost like holding a mirror up, and you can see a little bit of yourself in the decisions your character makes.
Yeah, that it's fascinating to me. Like it's fascinating, and I mean, we talked about this in the first podcast, which was like recorded like a year ago with Parker, which was like with the metaverse, which is like that's what's slightly terrifying about the metaverse. I think is people fully immersing themselves in this thing that completely immerses their senses, right? And the fact that our senses are our experience of reality and the way that we have agency in this world in some sense, right? Yeah. You thinking, hey, I can just go into this world and do whatever the heck I want in this world. It's like there's probably more moral agency there than you may realize. You know,
I mean, the more that I think,
like you said, like if you play The Witcher 3 and that cuts deep, right? It's like, oof, my gosh, these kids just died, and then now you're gonna think about like, okay, I gotta make a different. Maybe I gotta make a different decision this time.
Yeah, if I'm gonna start my entire playthrough,
yeah, I want the kids to die. Yeah, no, but like don't maybe restart the whole entire playthrough. But maybe you're thinking about that, and then maybe next time you play it through, you're gonna make a different decision because you're like, and right, like what that's doing is it's almost using your moral muscles, and making you use the moral muscles as you interact with a particular story. And I remember and this kind of gets back some sense to the original question, which is like that video games are able to tell really compelling stories.
Yeah.
Like they're able to actually tell epic stories in which you actually have some agency in that epic story.
You get to be Odysseus You know,
are you going? Yeah, like
yeah.
are
you gonna go sleep with that witch of Odysseus? You really gonna do that?
Probably every time. No, like what are you gonna do? Are you gonna stuff your ears with cotton on the boat, or are you gonna also tie yourself to the mast and listen to the sirens? Are you gonna not tie yourself to the mast and listen to the sirens, and then probably crash that boat on the ship? Are you there? Yeah, I mean, again, like there's certain.
And honestly, that's kind of what that's what you do when you have good dialogue around a book too. Especially a storybook like the epics. You kind of go through there and you end up talking through the story, the characters, sort of what happened, and you start to think about, what was underlying the story, what was underlying these characters' decisions, and then you start to think about like would I have done that? And you eventually I think you do eventually get to that point in books and other story medium. I remember reading the Iliad and discussing it in class, and one of the big conversations was around, Achilles versus Hector.
Oh gosh.
Yes, you probably remember this too, right?
Yeah, everybody wants to go and be like, "Oh, I'm a Hector fanboy."
Yeah. I argued devil's advocate for Hector in class. Don't worry, I ended up converting to Achilles. But my point there is that I think from a modern perspective, you read that and you really do sympathize with Hector, right?
Yeah.
But you have to do some deep analysis there to realize, not even that deep. Maybe you do have to do deep analysis. I don't know where you're coming from. But at a certain point, you do get to the perspective that, what Homer was doing here was operating under these Greek virtues. He was operating in this mindset that was thoroughly Greek. And when we look at the story, we're operating from a modern mindset. From a modern mindset, Hector doing what he does makes a lot of sense to us, and we see Hector a lot of the times. This was true in my class, probably true in your class. A lot of people looked at Hector and they were like, "Well, he's the hero of the Iliad."
All the girls, every girl.
Yeah, and honestly,
well, I mean, to be fair, it makes sense. Like,
from a postmodern perspective, it totally makes sense.
You have one character like Achilles and Briseis, and you're like, "Well, I kind of want to be."
Yeah. But you have to like sit down, think about it, like put yourself in the mindset of the Greek listening to this play or listening to this epic. So I think really get more meaning out of it. I'm not saying like reading it from a modern perspective is necessarily bad, but I think if you really want to like get into it, you got to go back to what was the original frame of mind that you were going to read this in. I'm getting a little off topic here, but
well,
the gist, or I guess what I'm trying to say is I think at a certain point you do get to when you do thorough analysis and have good dialogue about a story, regardless of the medium, I think at a certain point you do get to a question of, would I have done that? Or was that the right thing to do? Like, should this character have done that? And you start to think through the agency. And then with that, there's this creative process, at least for me, when I'm reading books, of like, okay, what if this character had done something else? And then I start to like get creative about it and think through like, maybe this would have happened, maybe this would have happened. I mean, fan fiction. Like, think about like fan fiction. The Snape wives of the early 2000s. What if they had been there and Snape had fallen in love with them and gotten married? Would he have had to die? And they could have brought him back from the brink. They could have been his Lily Potter. I don't know. I'm getting
no.
I went way too.
There is
off the deep end
there is something.
Deep cuts.
Yeah. No, there is something about the fan fiction is probably actually a pretty good example of this whole, like, when you read a book, you start to dream of and you start to envision being in that same place and what decisions you might make, or making the same decisions the character make. And that gets back to the whole point where it's like, especially with, I think that's what's so revealing. And I suppose they're revealing in different ways, right? Where, when you read the Iliad, the Odyssey, Homer's revealing something incredibly deep about human nature and about the relationship that, it's not everything that but I mean, Homer's the goat. Homer is the goat. Yeah. He is the OG. He's the goat.
He or she or they.
No,
who knows?
It is he, and he is the goat.
Homer
and there is the grave of Homer, and I will go there with Parker someday and we will be pouring libations out to Homer as we read the Iliad.
Right.
No, the point.
Just trying to interject some more drama. Into
but drama. There are things that are being revealed about the way that about man's nature, and also about the way that man interacts with the gods, right? And all of these things are realities. Let's make that very clear. He's revealing something very deep about the nature of reality, right? And it's why he's quoted almost like the scriptures by Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and all the great all the Greek philosophers, right? Yeah. But there's
been mimicked throughout all of history. Virgil, Milton.
Yeah, pretty much.
Everybody who tried to write an epic after him.
yeah, exactly.
Gotta outdo this Homer guy.
But it's like when you read that, oftentimes you're put in this place of like, would I have made the same decision? It's the same thing with the Psalms, right? Like going back to my conversation about the Psalms, which is like when you read the Psalms or when you read Homer, you are also in that place like, am I able to pray this psalm the same way? Would I make the same decision? Would I have the same sort of conviction or virtue that Odysseus or Achilles has, right? Do I have that same virtue? And when you find that thing is lacking in yourself, the psalm or the epic is actually able to impress upon you and help you to make that decision, to help you to have that virtue by living in some sense the life of Achilles or the life of the psalmist, right? Praying with the psalmist, right? Yeah. Allowing the psalmist in some sense to carry you in your prayer, or Achilles to carry you in virtue, right? Yeah. Like there's an ability to actually, that thing can begin to impress itself and kind of carry you to heights that you cannot go yourself. Whereas, like you said, with a video game, there's something incredibly revealing, like a mirror almost, where you're mirrored. And at times, I think because you don't have the same pressures that you have on yourself in this world, right? There's certain pressures you can also make, and I think there is an argument to be made that you are able to, if you desire virtue, that you're able to practice some sort of, you can practice virtue and you can practice vice. In video games. Like you can actually do both of those things within video games. Not probably NCAA football. NCAA football, you're having a great time. You're just playing some football, and you're.
Yeah, they don't let you simulate the frat parties, unfortunately.
No, you can't. Unfortunately, you don't have no.
It'd be really revealing what they do.
Yeah, that would be hilarious. It's just like it's like a NCAA football, but real life, and it's like, are you going to? Yeah, that's.
How would you like to?
You failed the drug test. You are kicked off the team. You're like, dude, what is this? What is this game? You drank too much. You missed practice. You are now running laps. That's funny. No, but it's really interesting. Sort of like the kind of getting back to the mediums of art. Like it's interesting. And now I want to kind of, I really do want to try to dig a little bit deeper into the very original one, which is like, how do you think that has affected the way of writing? Because I do think that the way that you have written and the way that Alex wrote his book have like the stories and the more modern writing all seems to be affected by this. And I guarantee every young writer is going to be influenced in some sense by video games. And like, how does it affect the writing? Because I'm not, it's like when you were talking about agency, I at times with your book, I almost felt as though I was in, like I had some agency. And I know this is going to sound weird, but like, I don't know if it's just like I don't even know how that would come through. And you know, in Alex's book, it really comes through in like just the world building, like the way in which people build worlds in video games is very specific. Like you can just like kind of, and that kind of came through at times in the way that he built his world, which I think is a beautiful world. Actually, the more I read it, I'm just like fascinated by the world that he's built. But it's very different than what you've done. So it's kind of two different things, and yet both of you were also still influenced by the video games. and I'm just
I think I need to read. I need to read Alex's book. And
yeah,
kind of.
But yeah, anyways, do you have thoughts on that? Like, what about your writing?
Yeah,
would you say is like akin to
on a really
this way that video game story is told
on a really practical level? This isn't just video games, but I think video games does help with this. It helps blocking out scenes. Does that make sense?
No.
So I think, I don't know how much video games play into this, but when I'm thinking up a battle scene, let's say, one of the things that I've noticed as I write more and more is that I'm hyper aware of like environment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Environment and just, where are the characters situated, where are the enemies situated, how many enemies are there, what weapons do they have, right? And I think part of that for me is carryover from video games, honestly. Just having this sense of scale in my mind of, okay, we're in a, this fight scene takes place in a alleyway. It's a narrow alleyway. There's not going to be any, maneuvering around the enemies. It's going to have to be like an up front, one enemy's in front, one enemy's in back. You're just going to have to fight it out that way. So in that sense of like setting the scene or blocking out the scene, video games have done a lot for me, I think. Again, I can't say how much of that actually comes from video games versus maybe just even watching movies or thinking about this and imagining things.
I was almost thinking what you were about to say was like blocks of scenes, like the way video games are, right? You have the cutscenes, and then you might have particular video games, right? You have the cutscenes, and you have then you're playing action scenes, then cutscenes, then action scenes again, right? And those are kind of the video games that you tend to play more than other ones, which is like almost like in writing, like literally blocks of writing.
I kind of see where you're coming from there. I think that's just telling a story. To be perfectly honest, like if I'm writing a story, I don't want. I mean, I guess it depends on the story I'm writing, but with book 2, there's been a lot of dialogue in book 2. Well, not just a lot of dialogue, but there's not as much action in book 2 because it's kind of in a. Without spoiling anything, it's. I guess I'll just say there's not as much action in book 2. So one of the things I've struggled with is, okay, the action that is there. First, where do I put that action? Second, how do I, drizzle that throughout the story or sprinkle that throughout the story so that the readers aren't just like, oh my gosh, not another chapter that's just 2 dudes talking like for 17 pages.
It's funny that you say that though, because of what I've read of book 2, there's more action than you're giving it credit for. Like, but it's not what people would quintessentially call like an action scene. Like, there is a lot of action.
Yeah, I think that's another aspect to it, is figuring out how to interject these little rushes of adrenaline in without simply having characters like duke it out.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you have characters duking it out every 5 pages, like, you're not going to have a story. You're just going to have a narration of like Mortal Kombat, basically, with maybe some world building and quips thrown in here. Yeah, I guess to circle back though, I don't know if that necessarily comes from video games. I think that's just something that any storyteller is going to have to contend with. That action can come from conflict, like a conflict of philosophy, where you have 2 characters who vehemently disagree about something. And the chapter is them like arguing about it. Like, that can be tense. That can be sort of action packed in a sense. So when I say action, I don't necessarily mean, the character's duking it out.
I mean, maybe we'll have to probably end with this because it's
getting a little
as
late.
We're recording this, it's midnight, and I got to get up and try to build a API tomorrow. So I'm gonna have to get up and not be a total loser in the morning. But in terms of the video games, like I think it's interesting. Like when you were just talking, it brought to mind, we were just talking about J.K. Rowling before this, and Harry Potter. And Harry Potter, everybody had the experience probably of reading Harry Potter and being like, this is like a movie. Like,
yeah.
if they just had made the books scene for scene,
It's been really good.
everybody wished they could just, and yet again, you can't do that because the film and some of the films are better than others. But like, you can't really do that because the medium of book is still the medium of a book, and the medium of, and yet like, she almost more than any other author, I think, represents the authors who were influenced by film. And maybe she would agree with that. Maybe she would completely disagree with that. I'm not sure.
I'm sure experience that you've.
Yeah, like I'm sure that she's had other influences, but I feel as as a reader, you read those books almost like these films come alive, right? And you're in it, right? You're in this film with these characters. And when I have read your book and Alex's book, the thing that has struck me is this mix now between these video games and these films and all these other influences. And Alex and you have both read just an incredible amount of fiction and mythology and epics and ancient literature and all this stuff. So there's this giant conglomeration of things. And yet what's so interesting to me, I think at times stands out because it's different than anything else I've ever read, is literally the influence of video games, because it's different. Yeah. It stands out because it is different. And there's like again, this isn't good or bad. I think, so many people just, for different reasons. I think people have disliked J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter, and let's not go there because then we're going to spend another hour talking about all that kind of stuff. We'll touch upon that some other time. But
I like Harry Potter.
I liked Harry Potter too. I did too.
Book series.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah.
No, the books were great. The movies I'm not as much of a fan of. I found the movies at times just kind of like, they just like bored me more than the books did. Like I just found the books were so much more vibrant and alive, and there's so much more to the books than the movies. But
and you get this with Lord of the Rings too, but the characterizations were different in the movies than in the books, especially with like Ron. Ron in the books was
cooler,
way more developed.
Yeah.
I think than Ron in the movies. They did Ron a little bit of a disservice, and Ginny too. Ginny was
You're like, why is he marrying her?
I know. In the movies, it doesn't make much sense. In the books, you're like, it makes more sense. Well, there's a lot of chemistry there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I get it. Together. Yeah. Sorry.
No. No, but like, just like she sort of, to me at least, represents this author influenced by movies and film.
Yeah.
I've read your book and now Alex's, which it's like, man, there's going to be young authors now that are just like, that are undeniably influenced by video games, and that I think is actually a good thing. I
hope so. Yeah.
No, I do. I think I think anything that's different and change is going to be hard, but I do think that there is something legitimately beautiful and good about this sort of medium of art, and the fact that authors, I think it's also just a fact of the matter. Like, people are going to be influenced by this stuff. And there's going to be some people, I'm not a video game player. If I ever wrote a book, which who knows if I'll ever be able to write a book, but like, if I were ever able to write one, I wouldn't be as influenced by video games. I just wouldn't. Whereas like, you played, good number of video games, at times too many. Yeah. And I know Alex played a lot of video games, and maybe he didn't. I don't know. Don't want to throw you under the bus, Alex. Maybe you did. Maybe you played too many at times, or I don't know. Who knows? But I know that the influence was there. And I'm just kind of interested in it because I think it's actually quite beautiful. Like, I find the way that you guys have written to be a really compelling and captivating. Like, your story is captivating and compelling. It's incredible to read. It's an incredible story, and it's different than anything else that I've read from other stories. There's similarities to lots of things, and we can talk about all those, but it's like, there is something different because of the influences that are at play. as you've grown up, and one of those happens to be the video games, and I think that's just fascinating. It's fascinating to me because it's interesting to see people's influences come out in their writing. And
I think that's something we talk about with any author you go back and read throughout history, like Dostoevsky. If you're going to read Dostoevsky, you're going to have to think and talk about the context. No, but you got to understand the circumstances of his life.
Yeah.
Like, he spent some time in prison.
Yeah.
It's brutal. There's rough political scene in Russia. Like, there's all this stuff going on at the time that influenced his writing, and it's probably the same for any author throughout history. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah. I guess the last thing on video games I want to say is the one danger with them is that they're really, really, they fulfill your need for creativity too easily at times, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, like, something I've noticed recently is just that, when I play video games, I think this is a good thing. Like, props to the people who designed the video games, but like, I feel kind of fulfilled creatively when I like log off, depending on the video game. If I'm playing a first person shooter, it's probably less true, but something I've thought about is the fact that, like, a lot of creativity and a lot of my best, like, story ideas, and the times that I'm thinking of the story and progressing the story in my mind, and honestly on the paper, are when I'm bored. Like, when I don't have an outlet, and when I'm kind of like pushed to the brink, and I'm like, all right, I guess I'll think about this now, or I'm so bored that, like, I see something and it sparks like a little bit of creative interest in me, and I'm like, ooh, that makes me think about this. That makes me think about this. Now I'm thinking about the book. Now I'm thinking about this character. Now I'm progressing the storyline.
Which is absolutely the criticism of, for me, it's like YouTube, right? Or other things, right? I think that's the criticism.
It's very engaging.
Yeah. And again, props to people who are able to do it. Also, not props to the people who did it intentionally to try to addict people. No props.
But, get rid of microtransactions in video games.
Yeah,
that's my one plea to the video game makers, who I seriously doubt are going to listen to this. But
there is a
no loot boxes.
Yeah, no loot boxes.
I don't know. It's a complicated topic.
Free loot boxes, Fortnite. No, I'm joking.
Free.
Yeah.
Make video games socialist again.
Yeah.
I don't know if they ever were, but
no, there's a certain, like, we talk about, it's the conversation that surrounds cell phones and any other sort of, these electronic devices that we have, which is like, they fulfill a need at times too easily. Mm-hmm. And then because they fulfilled that need too easily, we're not able to really discover the true fulfillment of that need, right? Because they're fulfilling it artificially in some sense, and they're not. And again, I think that there are times where it's fulfilled. It's in the right place. I remember, Bishop Barron said, our life like being like a stained glass window, right? And when the makers of the stained glass windows, they made them so that the center of it is usually, Christ, and the absolute center is, that which our whole life ought to be centered on. And then around the center is formed so it's a well-ordered life. It's a vision of a well-ordered life, right? And it kind of radiates out from the center. And I think in some sense, there is a place for video games. There is a place for watching YouTube. The amount of things you can learn from YouTube is just unbelievable, right? There's a place for these things, but we often struggle to put them in the right place. And that's where virtue comes into play, and we end up having to fight because there are people who are creating certain, software programs to literally help us to become vicious rather than virtuous, right?
Yeah. Or just to exploit our natural tendencies, which makes sense if you're trying to make money. Like, exploit them.
If that's the end, that you have in mind, it's just money. Then you're going to exploit these certain tendencies, which that's another podcast that is a huge mission of mine in life, and I know Parker's, and the whole Bonfire media and everything is like, let's just try to change this. Is part of the reason why I'm really interested in software development. Of like, if we're gonna live with this stuff, then we got to figure out how to use it, and we gotta like take the bull by the horns and figure out how to like create. If we're gonna live, if electronics are going to exist, then by golly, we got to figure out how to like create something that's going to help us to become virtuous rather than vicious.
How can we integrate it well into our lives?
Yeah,
because for the first time in history, we have crazy technological progress and no time to sit down and figure out
and the people
how
who
to
have,
integrate it well.
And the people who have thought about it have only thought about it, have often, and I mean that the social dilemma has sort of, touched upon that. And I think most young people would have told you that without ever having to watch the documentary, which is like, people thought about getting you addicted to this stuff. Like they created this stuff to be purposely. But again, that's another discussion. But I do think, like, going back to the video games, of like they fulfill this artistic need too easily. I think that's true, because I think there's like, but again, it doesn't mean that the thing itself is evil or wrong, but it's
how you use it.
How do we use it well, and how do we create the things which are going to put that thing in its right place and put it in its right order. And like you said, I mean, we kind of need to be bored to be creative. Like, I mean, I find the same thing with like music. Like if I'm going to write a poem or a song, often I need the space and the time and the boredom in some sense. And
that can be really hard to get nowadays.
It can be really hard to get. It can be really, really
especially
hard
if you have a new.
As a kid, and you're going to school, and you're trying to create a media thing, a publishing company, and there's lots of things, but and yet at the same time, it's like, I don't know, I've recently just usually I got a lot of thoughts on that. Again, another thought on like, maybe it's time management. I don't want to call it time management because it sounds so boring and like modern. Of like, I'm going to manage my time.
Yeah, but on a basic level, it's time management. Yeah, it's where you put your energy.
No, it's true. So, anyways, let's end there, because I need to go to bed and I need to get up tomorrow morning and actually help my team put together this API. And you get to sleep.
Yeah. Well, I get to. Sleep. I'll
get to
just sleep. Yeah.
You get to sleep.
Yeah, that's true. Day off.
It's nice. All right. Sweet. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, no problem.